Good afternoon. I'm David McNitzky, one of the pastors at Manchac United Methodist Church, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another edition of Nourishment at Noon. Now, who's this guy, and what's he got to do with anything? Well, there's a story behind that I'd like to share with you today. But first, a reminder that someone from the staff is here Monday through Friday each day to offer perhaps some hope, some help, some encouragement along the way during these times of sheltering in place. A few times a week, I walk a certain direction that takes me past a healthcare facility. And there's a large sign in front of the healthcare facility that says, "Heroes work here." And you've probably seen that at other health facilities as well. Perhaps you're aware of, in some countries, at 7 o'clock every night, people come out and they clap in honor of people who are on the front line, healthcare workers. And of course now, even in America, we are getting flyovers by Blue Angels and Thunderbirds as a way of honoring those on the front line, not just healthcare workers, but people along the line of the food chain and other important tasks that keep our country going. So we are in the midst of everyday heroes. With that in mind, I wanted to share with you what I'm planning to do for the next few weeks on my time with you, which is to share with you about some of my heroes. Some of them are people that you may recognize from history. Others are people that you have never and perhaps will never on earth meet. And I'd like to tell you about both of them. And the reason why is that I think this is a time that calls for heroes. And I believe those of us who shelter in place and do so faithfully and also patiently and even courageously as we go forward in life together, I think we will look sometime in the future, we'll look back and see that there were a lot of everyday heroes during this pandemic. And so with that in mind, I'd like to celebrate and encourage you as an everyday hero by telling you about some of the heroes in my own life and from history as well. And I do that again because we are in a time for heroes, and I think that we live our lives in narrative and in story. And so as we look at the stories of others, perhaps we can be encouraged with the story for ourselves. So today my subject is General Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, winner of the Medal of Honor and 4-term governor of the state of Maine. And interestingly, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain started actually as a pastor. He graduated seminary and was a Christian, pastoring, but also teaching rhetoric at a college. In fact, he was so broad-minded, he could teach everything but math and science, apparently. But he would encourage students in his classes to join the anti-slavery movement. So much so that he ruffled the feathers of some in the administration. Finally, moved by the cause of anti-slavery so much, Chamberlain tried to quit his college faculty job and join the Union Army. The university president wouldn't let him do it, but would let Chamberlain go on a sabbatical to study in Europe. So Chamberlain said that's what he was doing, and unbeknownst to his university president and his family, he joined the Union Army. They wanted in the 20th Maine to give him the rank of colonel, but he said, "Look, you've got to learn the job from the ground up, so I can't start that high." And he started, though, as lieutenant colonel. In the midst of the Civil War, before the Battle of Gettysburg, his colonel was promoted and the 20th Maine was given to Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. But he was given an additional gift as well. He was given soldiers who had deserted from the Union cause and had been captured and were brought back. And he was told that these soldiers were to be added to the 20th Maine, and they said to him, "Get these soldiers to fight or shoot them." That was Chamberlain's challenge. And the challenge was to do this all the while moving north toward an unforeseen destination and encounter with destiny at a little town called Gettysburg. Gettysburg, as you know, was a critical battle and of 3 days. But on the second day, the Confederates seemed to be winning. Many people call it the high water mark of the Confederacy. But the battle turned on a strategic piece of land called Little Round Top. It was a high hill, and Chamberlain saw its value immediately on during the second day of the battle and moved his troops to the 20th Maine to defend the high ground. And then also soldiers from the Confederacy realized the importance, and so they repeatedly attacked with troops from Alabama. And each time Chamberlain's troops of the 20th Maine repelled them. But Chamberlain's troops were running low on ammunition. And so, according to a friend of mine, a retired three-star general, for the only time in U.S. military history, a commander ordered a fixed bayonet charge. Out of ammunition, the Union charged the Confederate line, surprised them, and because the Union was already sort of strung out anyway, because there weren't many of them, the charge ended up almost being like a pincer movement that trapped the Confederate soldiers. Chamberlain received a Medal of Honor for his bravery, and typically in history it is called the turning point of Gettysburg, and therefore the turning point of the Civil War. Chamberlain would later be promoted to general and would continue to fight in the Civil War once he was shot, but because he carried a Bible and a picture of his wife in a frame under his vest, covering his chest, the bullet hit the picture frame, skidded under his skin, went around the ribs and outside the back. People thought he had been shot through to the back and that he would die, but it turned out it was more of a flesh wound, and he survived. He would later die 50 years after a battle in 1864 from wounds that were received at that battle. Chamberlain continued to fight in the Union cause and was present at the surrender at Appomattox. He was the one who received the Confederates' intention to surrender. He was also the one who, when the defeated army moved into Appomattox, made sure that his Union soldiers saluted them with the deepest amount of respect and humility. Chamberlain would go on to become a four-term governor of Maine, and then even president of the college from which he had taken an illegal leave of absence during the war. When I think about Chamberlain's life, three lessons jump out that I'd like to share with you very briefly about today. The first is this, the importance, I think, of cause and having a cause in your life. Chamberlain, while he was teaching rhetoric at the university, finally found his voice. His voice was in the anti-slavery movement, and it energized him. And so he spoke encouragingly to his students, and then finally went out to give his own life for the cause. And so I'd encourage you to ask yourself, where's my voice? What is it that I'm passionate about? Where could I be heroic? Another thing I learned is not just the importance of cause, but the reality of criticism. After he won his third term as governor of Maine by the largest margin ever, in the fourth term, he barely won because he would not support prohibition in the 19th century and Maine's prohibition, and use forces of state militia to back up the prohibition. And so he ran afoul of critics. Also, some critics emerged after the Civil War who said that he wasn't really the one who ordered the bayonet charge and that he is credited with something he didn't do. So it reminds me of the reality, if you're a hero or heroine and you're going to step forth in front of people, you're likely to catch fire, including friendly fire from people. But the most important thing I want to share with you in closing is what I learned from Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain is the importance of character, specifically humility. The humility that refused being a full colonel until he had earned his rank. The humility that showed proper and due respect to a defeated enemy. A humility that once led him to say this to his troops on the verge of the Battle of Gettysburg. He said to his troops in 1863, we don't know the future, and we cannot determine it very much, but we can determine the kind of people we will be when the future arrives. It is our character that leads, I believe, to our actions, and it is our actions that ultimately will lead to our destiny. And that is our first lesson on leadership from a hero. I'd remind you, what is it that you want to give your life toward? Are you willing to put up with the critics? Are you willing to follow humbly and persistently your inner voice? God bless you in these days ahead.